So I've just finished a COVID intubation. You can see the marks I've left on my eyes from the goggles I was wearing. It seems like a good time to talk about the role of simulation in allowing us to prepare for the COVID pandemic and clinical care here in the hospital. When we started the simulation program about 2 years ago, our goal was to make people better at the really important life-threatening emergencies that we don't get to see very often. So we've drawn up scenarios and given people the opportunity to practice those things where seconds count, minutes count, but scenarios that don't tend to come up in real life as often as one would need to get really good into practice. So the simulation program has allowed us to do that for all kinds of clinical scenarios. We never really had a sense that something like COVID was coming on, but we're so fortunate that we had a robust simulation program because it's given us the opportunity to practice, to think about, to rehearse how we're going to take care of people with really bad COVID disease. One of the things that happens in COVID illness is a really bad pneumonia that often requires intubation and mechanical ventilation. And at the best of times, that's a stressful scenario. In any kind of respiratory emergency, that's a really stressful, challenging scenario. You add a whole new layer with COVID in that this patient also has a contagious disease that they can pass along to staff members, to other patients. So we've had to rewrite the playbook entirely to be able to take care of these kinds of people, but also in a way that protects our staff. And I'm sure you've heard in the media lots of discussions about personal protective equipment or PPE. So we've had to rewrite the playbook around how we're going to do these intubations in full PPE, how we're going to get in and out of it, how we're going to communicate, with these big helmets on and these big masks on. So having a simulation program where we've been able to do that has given us a huge leg up. And having just done one a couple minutes ago, I'm just so thankful that we had the opportunity to think about these things before we actually had to do them in practice. So we actually started doing COVID simulations quite a bit before we actually had a sense that we were going to see patients. Back in the day when Ebola was kind of a thing that was kicking around, not really in North America, but globally, we did some Ebola simulations, and we kind of thought this was going to be the same idea. We'll do some things just in case we ever had to think about it or actually have to look after people with COVID. So that was the last week of February, and the first week of March, we did some simulations and we did some walkthroughs and thought about how we might redesign our emergency room a little bit and where we might take care of patients and what that might look like, what kind of equipment we would want ready. And it turned out that became really important. So we were able to put together, in particular, an airway protocol around how we would intubate someone with COVID disease in a way that protects both the staff and optimizes care for the patient. And we were out sort of ahead of the actual clinical presentation. So we were able to put together a manual that ended up getting shared nationally through some of the rural medicine networks. We're fortunate that we have the simulation program here in Collingwood, but most hospitals our size wouldn't have the opportunity to do this kind of work. So we were able to share our findings and share our experiences with other hospitals and got really excellent feedback from a bunch of rural centers that incorporated some of our work into what they were doing. We learned a lot of things with our simulation. A lot of it was around ergonomics. Where do you stand? Where do you go? How do you minimize the chance of contamination? We also had to learn to do a lot of these high-stress technical tasks in equipment, in protective equipment we've never worn before. So we're wearing full face shields and helmets and N95 respirator masks and goggles, and that's a big change. It's really hot in that equipment. It's hard to hear people. It's hard to talk to people. So we really had to learn a new way of doing things. We also learned that that added personal protective equipment adds a lot of stress to what is already a very stressful situation. So even without the contagious part of this, intubating someone with respiratory failure is a nerve-wracking endeavor. And so to do it in this stressful situation where you're not only worried about the patient, but now you're worried about your colleagues, you're worried about who's going to get exposed and how do we minimize that exposure. Being able to practice this, go over it time and time again, think about the PPE, figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. That was super valuable because there's lots of stuff that on paper sounds great and you think, oh, that'll really protect me well, and then you get into the scenario and you realize I can't wear this and I can't function like this, so I'm going to have to switch to something else or try something else. So we're able to learn better communication skills, how to work within the PPE, what PPE was going to work in what situation. We changed the ergonomics of our department, of our emergency room and our ICU to make sure that we were doing this in the places that could best accommodate the procedure. So yeah, lots of learning.
Dealing with the COVID pandemic is scary, and it has caused a lot of anxiety in our communities. I can assure you that your CGMH hospital staff are properly trained, and we've practiced how to care for our patients in these unique and challenging times. Our practice has helped reduce our team's anxiety and ensures that we are able to provide excellent, efficient, and effective care. The simulation program that was funded by our generous donors is one of our very important tools that we are using to ensure we are prepared to treat our patients expertly while protecting those who are providing care. Thank you for making our simulation program a reality for us. You are truly saving lives, patients and caregivers.